Hello and welcome back to the channel. Time for a bit more holes. Before you might be able to see Luna in the back. She's on a bit of a mad one today, so I'm sure she'll feature at some point in this video. Right, to kick us off, chapter 39. Stanley awoke in a meadow, looking up at the giant rock tower. It was layered and streaked with different shades of red, burnt orange, brown and tan. It must have been over 100 feet tall. Stanley lay a while, just looking at it. He didn't even have the strength to get up. It felt like the insides of his mouth and throat were coated with sand. And no wonder, when he rolled over, he saw the waterhole. It was 2.5 feet deep and over 3 foot wide. At the bottom lay no more than 2 inches of brown water. His hands and his fingers were sore from digging, especially under his fingernails. He scooped some dirt into his mouth, then swished it around, trying to filter it with his teeth. Zero moaned. Stanley started to say something to him, but no words came out of his mouth, and he had to try again. How are you? It hurt to talk. Not good, Zero said quietly. With great effort, he rolled over, raised himself to his knees, and crawled to the waterhole. He lowered his head into it and lapped up some water. Then he jerked back, clutched his knees to his chest, and rolled to the side. His body shook violently. Stanley thought about going back down the mountain looking for the shovel, so he could just make the waterhole deeper. Maybe that would give them cleaner water. They could use the jars as drinking glasses. But he didn't think he'd have the strength to go down, let alone to make it back up again. He didn't know where to look. He struggled to his feet. He was in a field of greenish-white flowers that seemed to extend all the way around Big Thumb. He took a deep breath, then walked the last 50 yards to the giant piece and touched it. Tag, you're it. Then he walked back to Zero and the waterhole. On the way, he picked up some flowers. Actually, wasn't one big flower, he discovered, but each flower was really a cluster of little flowers that formed a round ball. He brought it up to his mouth, but had to spit it out. He could see part of the trail that he'd made the night before when he carried Zero up the mountain. If he was going to head back down and look for the shovel, he realised he should do it soon, while the trail was fresh. But he didn't want to leave Zero. He was afraid Zero might die while he was gone. Zero was still lying doubled over on his side. I've got to tell you something, he said with a groan. Don't talk, said Stanley. Save your strength. No, listen, Zero insisted. Then he closed his eyes as his face twisted with pain. I'm listening, Stanley whispered. I took your shoes, Zero said. Stanley didn't know what he was talking about. His shoes were on his feet. That's all right, he said. Just rest now. It's all my fault, said Zero. It's nobody's fault, said Stanley. I didn't know, Zero said. That's okay, Stanley said. Just rest. Zero closed his eyes, but then again, he said, I didn't know about the shoes. What shoes? From the shelter. It took a moment for Stanley to comprehend. Clyde Livingston's shoes. I'm sorry, said Zero. Stanley stared up at him. It was impossible Zero was delirious. Zero's confession seemed to bring him some relief. The muscles in his face relaxed, and he drifted into sleep. Stanley softly sang him the song that had been in the family for generations. If only the woodpecker sighs, the bark on the trees with a little bit softer. While the wolf waits below, hungry and lonely, he cries to the moon. If only, if only. There you go, chapter 39. Anyone starting to make any links yet? We've got a song. We've got 2 people up on Big Thumb. Let's find out a little bit more then. Chapter 40. When Stanley found the onion the night before, he didn't question how it had come to be there. He ate it gratefully. But now he sat gazing at Big Thumb and the meadow full of flowers. He couldn't help but wonder about it. If there was one wild onion, there could be more. He intertwined his fingers and tried to rub out the pain. Then he bent down and dug up another flower, this time pulling up the entire plant, including the roots. Onions, fresh, hot, sweet onions, Sam called as Mary Lou pulled the cart down the main street. 8 cents a dozen. It was a beautiful spring morning. The sky was painted pale blue and pink, the same colour as the lake as the peach trees along its shore. Mrs. Gladys Tenson was wearing her nightgown and robe as she came running to the street after Sam. Mrs. Tenson was normally a very proper woman. who never went out in public without dressing up in her fine clothes and hat. So it was quite surprising to the people of Green Lake to see her running past them. "Sam!" she shouted. "Whoa, Mary Lou," said Sam, stopping his mule and cart. "Good morning, Mrs. Tyson," he said. "How's little Becca doing?" Gladys Tyson was all smiles. "I think she's going to be all right. The fever broke about an hour ago, thanks to you. I'm sure the good Lord and Dr. Hawthorne deserves most of the credit." "The good Lord, yes," agreed Mrs. Tenson, "but not to Dr. Hawthorne. The quack wanted to put leeches on her stomach." "Leeches? My word!" He said they would suck out the bad blood. Now you tell me, how would a leech know good blood from bad blood? "I wouldn't know," said Sam. "It was your onion tonic," said Mrs. Tyson. "That's what saved her." Other townspeople made their way to the car. "Good morning, Glads," said Hattie Parker. "Don't you look lovely this morning?" Several people snickered. "Good morning, Hattie," Mrs. Tyson replied. "Does your husband know you're parading around in your bedclothes?" Hattie asked. There were more snickers. "My husband knows exactly where I am and how I am dressed, thank you," said Mrs. Tyson. "We've both been up all night and half the morning with Rebecca." Ouch, I've been bit by Luna. Luna, stop. She almost died from the stomach sickness. It seems she ate some bad meat." Hattie's face flushed. Her husband, Jim Parker, was the butcher. "Get off." "It made my husband and me sick as well," said Mr. Tyson. "But it nearly killed Becca. With being so young, Sam saved her life." "It wasn't me," said Sam. "It was the onions." "I'm glad Becca's all right," Hattie said contrarily. "I kept telling Jim he needs to wash those knives," said Mr. Pike, who owned the general store. Hattie Parker excused herself and turned and quickly walked away. "Tell Becca that when she feels up to it, come by to the store and pick a piece of candy," said Mr. Pike. "Thank you, I'll do that." Before returning home, Mrs. Tyson bought a dozen onions from Sam. She gave him a dime and told him to keep the change. "I don't take charity," Sam told her, "but if you want to buy a few extra onions for Mary Lou, I'm sure she'd appreciate it." "All right then," said Mrs. Tyson. "Give me the change in onions." Sam gave Mrs. Tyson an additional 3 onions, and she fed them one at a time to Mary Lou. She laughed as the old donkey ate them out of her hand. Stanley and Zero slept on and off for the next 2 days. 8 onions, all they wanted, splashed dirty water into their mouth. In the late afternoon, Big Thumb gave them shade. Stanley tried to make the hole deeper, and he really needed the shovel. His efforts just seemed to stir up the mud and make the water dirtier. Zero was sleeping. He was still very sick and weak, but the sleep and the onions seemed to be doing some kind of good. Stanley was no longer afraid that he would die soon. Still, he didn't want to go for the shovel while Zero was asleep. He didn't want to wake him and think he'd been deserted. He waited for Zero to open his eyes. "I think I'll go look for a shovel," said Stanley. "I'll wait here," said Zero feebly, as if he had any other choice. Stanley headed down to the mountain. The sleep and the onions had done him a lot of good as well. He felt strong. It was fairly easy to follow the trail he'd made 2 days earlier. There were only a few places where he wasn't sure he was going the right way, but it took a little bit of searching before and he found the trail again. He went quite a ways down the mountain, but still didn't find the shovel. He looked back up towards the top of the mountain, and he must have walked right past, he thought. There was no way he could have carried Zero all the way up from here. Still, he headed down just in case. He came to a bare spot between 2 large patches of weed and sat down to rest. And they had definitely gone too far, he decided. He was tired out from walking down the hill. It would have been impossible for him to carry Zero up the hill from here, especially after walking all day with no food or water. The shovel must be buried in some weeds. Before starting back up, he took one last look around in all directions. He saw a large indentation in the weeds a little further down the mountain. It didn't seem likely that shovel could be there, but he'd already come this far. There, lying in some tall weeds, he found the shovel and the sack of jars. He was amazed. He wondered if the shovel had maybe rolled down the mountain. But none of the jars were broken except the one he broke earlier, and if they'd rolled down the hill, it would doubtfully that he would have found the sack and shovel side by side. On his way back up the mountain, Stanley had to sit down and rest several times. It was a long, hard climb. Right, we're at chapter 40 there. I reckon we'll give chapter 41 a go. It's not a very long one again. Zero's condition continued to improve. Stanley slowly peeled an onion. He liked eating them one layer at a time. The waterhole was now almost as large as the holes he'd dug back at Camp Green Lake, and contained almost 2 feet of murky water. Stanley had dug it all to himself, and Zero had offered to help, but Stanley thought it was better to Zero to save his strength. It was a lot harder to dig in water than it was on a dry lake. Stanley was surprised at himself he hadn't got sick, either from the sploosh, the dirty water, or having lived on onions. He used to get sick quite a lot back at home. Both boys were barefoot. They'd washed their socks. All their clothes were very dirty, but their socks were definitely the worst. They didn't dip their socks into the hole and frayed to contaminate the water. Instead, they filled jars and poured the water over their dirty socks. I didn't go down to the homeless shelter very often, Zero said. Just if the weather was really bad, I'd have to find somewhere to pretend to be my mum. If I'd just gone by myself, they would have asked me for a bunch of questions. If they found out I didn't have a mum, they would have made me ward of the state. What's ward of the state? Zero smiled. I don't know, but I didn't like the sound of it. Stanley remembered Miss Vedancy telling the warden that Zero was the ward of the state. He wondered if Zero knew he'd become one. I like sleeping outside, said Zero. I used to pretend I was a club scout. I always wanted to go to Cub Scout. I'd see them at the park in their blue uniforms. I was never a Cub Scout, said Stanley. I wasn't good at social stuff like that. Kids made fun of me because I was fat. I like the blue uniforms, said Zero. Maybe I would have one. I wouldn't have liked being a Cub Scout. Stanley shrugged one shoulder. My mother was a Girl Scout, said Zero. I thought you said you didn't have a mother. Everybody has a mother. Well, yeah, I know that. She said she once won a prize for selling the most Girl Scout cookies, said Zero. She was really proud of that. Stanley peeled off another layer of his onion. We always took what we needed, Zero said. When I was little, I didn't even know it was stealing. I didn't remember when I found out. But we just took what we needed, never more. So when I saw those shoes on display in the shelter, I just reached into the glass and took them. Clyde Livingston's shoes, asked Stanley. I didn't know they were his. I just thought they were somebody's old shoes. I was better to take someone's old shoes, I thought, than stealing a new pair. I didn't know they were famous. There was a sign, but of course, I couldn't read it. Then the next thing I know, everyone's making a big deal about how these shoes are missing. It was kind of funny in a way. The whole place going crazy, and there I was wearing the shoes, and everyone's running around saying, "What happened to the shoes? The shoes are gone." I just walked out the door. No one noticed. When I got outside, I ran around the corner, immediately took off the shoes. I put them on top of a parked car. I remember they smelled really bad. Yep, those were them, said Stanley. Did they fit you? Pretty much. Stanley remembered being pretty surprised at Clyde Livingston's small shoes. Stanley's shoes were bigger. Clyde Livingston had small, quick feet. Stanley's feet were big and slow. I should have just kept them, said Zero. I'd already made it out of the shelter and everything. I ended up getting arrested the next day when I tried to walk out of the shoe store with the new pair of sneakers. If I just got those kept those old smelly sneakers, then neither of us would be here right now. And that is the end of that. Not a long video today. We'll save the next couple of chapters for tomorrow, and we are actually very close to ending this book. And then we'll have to decide on one of the next books. And you can see there are 3 up there, so you can get yourself starting to think. We've got Simply the Quest as the bottom one, Nowhere Emporium in the middle one, and How to Train Your Dragon is the top one. Have a little think, and I will come back and see you tomorrow. For now, stay safe, take care, bye-bye.